Everybody knows that FabFilter Saturn 2 is one of the coolest and most versatile saturation plugins out there. But did you know it's also one of the greatest drum gates on the market? Today we're exploring that. Saturn has quickly become one of my favorite plugins, and I'm constantly finding new and unconventional ways to use it. I mentioned this trick briefly in my last video on Saturn, and I heard Nolly mention it in an interview with Jordan from Hardcore Music Studios the other day. But I wanted to dive a little bit deeper, showing you why it's not only one of the easiest gate plugins to use, but also one of the best, avoiding the biggest shortcomings of almost every other gate plugin. So grab your coffee, and let's jump into Pro Tools to check it out. So let's take a listen to our snare drum. I've got some EQ and a good bit of compression going on, but that's it at the moment. And that's a lot of bleed. The drummer's really digging into the cymbals in this section, and I'm compressing it pretty hard, so that's bringing it out even more. So let's toss on a normal gate and see what that does. So with that on, we're obviously cutting out the cymbals in between the hits, but we're also losing all the length to the snare. It's just kind of becoming a quick little blip. And then when the snare hits, the cymbals come flying in with it, giving a really weird, unnatural sound. Not to mention, we're completely cutting out the ghost notes. To deal with all that, we could bring the floor setting up so it's only ducking the cymbals down a little bit instead of completely cutting them out. Let's try that. So that's kind of better. It's not so abrupt and we're not totally losing the ghost notes. And with most gates, that's kind of what you have to deal with. You have to find settings that are a compromise, that get rid of the very worst of the bleed while not screwing up everything else too badly. But now let's see what we can do with Saturn. With a blank instance loaded up, the key control for what we're doing here is this dynamics knob. If we turn it clockwise, it'll act like a compressor and bring up our cymbals even more. But crank it the other way, and it's a gate. So with these settings, we still have a lot of the same issues we had with the normal gate. It's cutting out all of the ring of the snare and all the character that goes with that ring. Although I will say, it was a lot faster and easier to dial in than the traditional gate. No threshold or attack and release times to deal with, just twist the knob until the cymbals are no longer ripping your head off. But let's take this one step further. I'll set this back to the default settings, and this time, I'm going to click at the top of the interface to split Saturn into two bands. One for our lows and one for our highs. From here, we're going to select our top band, and we're just going to drop the dynamics knob until the cymbals are nicely tamed. That's already sounding so much better. Then you can tweak your crossover point a little bit to find the sweet spot where you're getting rid of most of the harshness without losing too much character. Or you can dial it in a little further with a third band. I usually split my snare into 3 bands in Saturn anyway, for the way I like to saturate it. I'll link to my video explaining that technique up here. But with a third band, we can gate the top end pretty heavily, the middle band more moderately, where the cymbals aren't as harsh, and where we're starting to get more of that character we don't want to lose, and then leave the low end alone entirely. Let's do a before and after of this setup. It's honestly insane how well this works. And then obviously you can go in and add some saturation or do a little tone shaping or whatever while you've got Saturn open, and you're good to go. One word of warning about this though. Because Saturn uses crossovers to create different bands, it causes some pretty radical phase shift at those points, which can potentially be a problem on multi-mic sources, like a snare drum. But luckily, it's pretty easy to avoid this. Once we get our settings dialed in, we'll just copy Saturn over to our snare bottom mic. If we don't want to gate our snare bottom, we can set the dynamics knob back to the center here, and we can use different saturation amounts or whatever. We just want to have these same crossover points so that both channels have the same phase shift and will therefore still be in phase with each other. If the snare mics weren't super in phase to begin with, this might not be such an issue, but it's just something to be aware of. So if you already own Saturn, give this a shot. And if you thought this trick was helpful, you'll probably like this video where I share my absolute favorite way to use Saturn while mixing drums. Or check out this playlist for a ton more cool drum mixing tips. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Boom. I did it.